Welcome to the Wellness on Purpose podcast, your go-to source for impactful, educational, and realistic information designed to propel you forward on your journey to intentional well-being, not just for today, but for the well-being of future generations. Join us as we dive into insightful conversation with industry and brand leaders in the ever-evolving landscape of the health and wellness industry. Discover the latest trends, gain valuable perspectives, and uncover practical tips to elevate your wellness journey starting today. This podcast is brought to you by Joanne's Place Health Foods, your trusted partner in health, located in the heart of Peterborough and Lindsay, Ontario. I'm your host, Marissa Laughlin, and I'm thrilled to be guiding you through this season of the Wellness on Purpose podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Wellness on Purpose podcast. It's your host, Marissa, and I'm so excited to be here today and to welcome back a previous guest from our podcast, Dr. Kate Rhéaume. She is a graduate and formal faculty member of the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. Dr. Kate is known for speaking internationally on many topics related to health and wellness, and she is also the author of the best-selling book, Vitamin K2 and the Calcium Paradox: How a Little-Known Vitamin Could Save Your Life. She's joined us previously on the podcast to talk about stress in children, but today I have asked her to join me in opening the conversation about how we can support our thyroid naturally. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing various natural strategies and nutrients that can support thyroid function in individuals with hypothyroidism, effective ways to support the adrenals, which are very closely linked to our thyroid function, nutritional intake through diet and possibly supplementation, as well as lifestyle essentials that can promote a balance and well-being, from stress management techniques to sleep hygiene, which are best supportive for the thyroid function. So whether you're dealing with hypothyroidism yourself, looking to support your adrenal health, or simply aiming to just gain more information about how to optimize your overall health and wellness, this episode's for you. So let's get into it and welcome Dr. Kate back onto the podcast. Good morning, Kate. Welcome back to the Wellness on Purpose podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm fine, thanks. Great to be back on the show.
Yeah, so happy to have you. I know our listeners have loved our previous episodes together, and I'm looking forward to talking about today's topic, which is primarily around the thyroid function, maybe the adrenals, all of those different systems that regulate our body that are really important for making sure that they are in check. So I want to start by talking about thyroid function, because this is something that I don't feel like gets talked about enough in the professional setting, especially with like naturopaths, nutritionists, because some things that we see other professions talking about maybe doesn't necessarily align with what we know about the thyroid. So let's start with talking about what hormones actually impact and we need to consider when we're talking about having a healthy thyroid function.
Yes, the thyroid is a gland that plays such an important role on our overall well-being, physical and even mental well-being. Of course, it's located in the neck, and it produces hormones that will govern our metabolism in a number of ways. That can affect how, like if we feel too warm or too cold, how easy or difficult it is for us to gain or lose weight. And so it really does affect lots of different aspects of our health, and we can touch on later even some symptoms that people experience when they have, for example, inadequate or sluggish thyroid function. But when we're looking at thyroid hormones, there's a few that are important. There's ones that come from the brain that send the message to the thyroid gland to make more or less thyroid hormones. So something called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, comes from the pituitary and then sends a message to the thyroid gland, which produces then two different types of thyroid hormones, T4 and T3. T4 is often produced and converted to T3, which is the active form. And if any of these things are out of whack, too high or too low, then you will have symptoms of thyroid disease or thyroid imbalance.
Okay. And as you just said there, some of those measuring marks, T3, T4. Some of them can be high, some of them can be low. So when we're talking about subclinical hypothyroidism and severe hypothyroidism, what is the difference between these two?
Yes, for the most part, when we see and on a day-to-day level, people who are struggling with thyroid function, it's often a hypo or low functioning thyroid. Hyper can happen as well. That's not quite as common. There seems to be a preponderance or some people have said almost a silent epidemic of low thyroid function. So typically with low thyroid function, you can see low levels of the thyroid hormones that should be coming out of the thyroid, so either T3 or T4 or both. But in some cases, those may be normal. So this is what we might call subclinical hypothyroid. So in other words, the blood tests are showing things are within normal range, or maybe at the, just below the normal range, or just at the high end of the normal range, depending on what hormone you're looking at. But there's still a lot of symptoms there. And so in this case, for example, people would in fact have elevated, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but the TSH that comes from the brain, it may be on the high side because that's the brain desperately sending a message to the thyroid to say, make more thyroid hormone because we feel like we don't have enough. And for whatever reason, that message isn't getting through. So that hormone can be elevated. But again, with this what's called subclinical hypothyroid, sometimes the blood values and the blood tests are looking within normal range, or again, at the end of normal, but there's a lot of symptoms associated with low thyroid function.
Okay, so kind of that subclinical is that just out of the range or like on the lower end of the range. And then the severe would be like almost your thyroid isn't functioning at all, essentially.
Exactly. And sometimes here, and this is important to be aware of, that the range itself is a bit of a problem because in some settings, people will say, well, you don't have low thyroid function until we see the TSH above, say, 4.5 or 5. When in fact, from a more functional perspective, you'd want that TSH lower. And again, remember, this is the lower sounds counterintuitive, but that's the message the brain is sending to the thyroid to try to get it to make more hormone. And if that's, above 1 or 2, in fact, you may be suffering with a low thyroid function, sluggish thyroid, even though it's not being flagged as abnormal according to conventional, reference ranges.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you about testing in just a second, but before we get into more of that clinical conversation around testing for thyroid levels, one of the more common things we see in the health and wellness industry is actually a basal body temperature regulation for thyroid function. Can you talk a little bit about what this is? Like, is there efficacy around this? Like, should people be using this method? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so in some ways you can think of this as a functional approach to testing your thyroid function. So, I mentioned that the thyroid governs our metabolism, how warm or cold we feel, how easily or difficult it is to gain or lose weight, burn calories, for example, and that can be reflected in our body's temperature. So the basal body thyroid test is you take your body temperature typically every morning at the same time, first thing in the morning, usually even before getting out of bed. You want what would be considered to be the basal resting body temperature. This can be done with, of course, a thermometer, either a mercury thermometer or digital thermometer. But now, more people are wearing either watches or even rings that will test things like body temperature. And as long as you've verified that that's accurate, that can be a way really quick and easy to check what your basal body temperatures are. And if you're consistently below 36.5 Celsius or 97.8 Fahrenheit, that suggests that your body temperature, in fact, is running too low, which is a sign that your thyroid is sluggish, or your function is not as good as it should be.
Okay. So this would be a great way to monitor the body to tell you kind of, okay, something is either, running smoothly, your temperatures are regulated, things like that. Because I know a lot of people will use this method also for ovulation, hormones. And as you said, we have watches, we have rings. It's so much easier to track these things these days. But when people see these temperatures fluctuating and they say, okay, something maybe isn't working optimally, I'm going to go and get some testing done. So beyond that temperature test, what type of tests are really beneficial to get done to check your thyroid levels?
There's a few, and also if you're going in for tests, this is a nice thing about the basal body temperatures. You don't want to have a blood test every few days or weeks, right? So you can see this, and yes, if you see it's low, there may be a problem. You want to go get checked out because yes, you want your thyroid function measured, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but also keep in mind that things like low testosterone and low iron for both men and women can affect your metabolism and potentially your body temperature function. So don't assume, oh, you've done the test, it's low, it's my thyroid, I'm going to treat myself. Do go see a naturopathic doctor or other functional medicine specialist. When it comes to checking your thyroid levels, even if you're just going in to see your family doctor, often the test that's done, the only test that's done is the TSH test. And again, if you're, within range, but still having symptoms, you need more information. So you want to get what's called a thyroid panel. That will also include T3 and T4. Sometimes it includes other things like thyroid antibodies in case there's an autoimmune component to the thyroid function, which is something that's not uncommon. And those are often, would be part of what's called a thyroid panel.
Okay. Now, you quickly touched there that when you're running something like a thyroid panel, there could be other things that are imbalanced. You said testosterone, iron, but when we are talking about somebody who does have an impacted thyroid function, say that they are hypo, so they have low thyroid function, does that low thyroid function have an impact on other systems in the body? And if it does, what would those systems be?
Yes, there is. Well, a few things. First of all, if you've got low vitamin D, that can impact your thyroid function. So that's part of it. But just in terms of systems, there is an important relationship between the thyroid and the adrenal glands. And it's in some ways almost a chicken and an egg scenario, what we see happening. But certainly we know that there's a relationship between, again, the hypothalamus pituitary that we mentioned is talking to the thyroid gland, as well as to the adrenal glands, which are major organs of stress response. And so sometimes when people have been either under like a short, acute, stressful or prolonged stressful situation, their adrenal glands are tired. What this means is they're not producing the right amounts of stress hormones at the right times of the day. And that then, if they're under functioning, it in fact can make your thyroid have to work a little bit harder than it should. And that can affect then thyroid function, which may be then slowing down. And so there is certainly an interplay between especially the adrenals and the thyroid.
And we know the adrenals are a big conversation right now. Like everybody is talking about cortisol. Everyone's talking about how to regulate that spike. And there's just so many things that impact the adrenals. And as you're saying, the thyroid function, they are like that chicken and the egg. They go back and forth, right? So I think when we're talking about hormones in general, I'm sure they all have a direct impact on each other. Even talking about like estrogen, progesterone, you mentioned testosterone, they all have an impact, right?
Very much so. There is definitely a symphony that's happening, and an orchestra with these things happening. And so, yes, good point. When you mentioned estrogen and progesterone, we know that with those changes, for example, around menopause and perimenopause, that is something that needs to be looked at as part of the bigger picture of in terms of imbalances hormonally.
Good to know. Now, I know you mentioned already there's some tests to have more of a solidified answer as to whether or not your thyroid is functioning optimally. But in terms of just caring for our thyroid function, do you think that there is specific dietary intake that we should be considering, whether you have like a low thyroid or if you're just, maybe thyroid disease runs in your family and you're trying to kind of be aware of that? Like when we talk about food in particular, are there specific things that really impact the thyroid?
Yes, very much so. So, First of all, it's important to be aware of when it comes to chronically low or low thyroid function, especially if it runs in the family. Gluten has been shown to be something that can slow or impact thyroid function. And so, people often aren't excited about hearing about going on a gluten-free diet or a wheat-free diet, but it really can make a difference in so many aspects of health. Thyroid function is one of them. So that's one thing to keep in mind and consider, especially if you've been struggling, even have been diagnosed with low thyroid function, taking medication, but not getting the results or symptom relief that you want. That's one thing to consider is a gluten or at least a wheat-free diet. And then you have to keep in mind that, like any other organ or gland in the body, the thyroid has specific nutritional needs, and these ones are unique. For example, the thyroid needs more iodine. We need, we talked about T3 and T4, those hormones have molecules of iodine in them. So we need adequate amounts of iodine. We also need selenium. This helps with the conversion of the thyroid hormones. There are other amino acids I can think of off the top of my head, tyrosine, for example. Zinc is a mineral involved in this. So there are specific nutritional needs that the thyroid gland has that we may not be getting from, day to day in adequate amounts. And those are ones to be, aware of and choose foods or, if necessary, supplements accordingly.
Okay. Now, iodine in particular, is there one specific food that has the highest level of iodine that people would want to consume regularly?
High levels of iodine you can find in seaweed. I know that's not a common food in most people's diets, but if you can get to incorporate a little bit of dulse or nori, snacks, you can get those pretty easily. Surprisingly, one of the main sources of iodine in North American diet is dairy foods. Now, this is tricky because some people are sensitive to dairy, or it's mucus forming or inflammatory for them. So you don't want to assume or necessarily rely on that if it's causing a sensitivity, but those foods are high. Of course, seafood would also be good sources of iodine. Those are probably some of the main ones and the highest ones.
Thanks for pointing those out. I know for me, I don't like anything from the water, but I will take like kombu flakes or like little pieces and I'll put it in a soup, or I will blend it in something so that I know I can't taste it, but I'm getting all of the benefits from it. So for those of you who are like, I don't like seaweed, that is what I do, is I just put it in things and I don't even know it's there.
That's a great suggestion, and I'm sure people will find more options at the store in terms of incorporating that into the diet because it's very underrepresented. We don't eat a lot of seaweed in our diet here in North America, and also make sure that for people who have switched to alternative salts, whether they're cooking with kosher salt or pink salt or Himalayan salt, those salts may not have iodine added to them the way regular table salt does. And so you just want to check with the salt that you're using whether you're getting any iodine from that, because that would be a main source of iodine in people's diet. So if you've switched to some kind of iodine-free salt, you need to make sure you're getting iodine in some other way. You can get drops like liquid kelp extract drops. I keep those in my cupboard, and I will have a drop a day to make sure I'm getting the iodine I need.
Oh, very good point about the salt, because we know that's another big conversation right now. Everyone's making the switch over to, sea salt, Celtic salt, Himalayan. So very good point about the salt. Quick pause in today's episode because I want to talk to you about a transformational online program. In case you missed it, Joanne's Place released an online program called the Wellness on Purpose Program to Educate You last year. And our intention with this program is to make this education more accessible for our community to better support their wellness journeys. This program promotes sustainable and realistic changes, and it really focuses on the foundational pillars of every single person's health: your nutrition, your sleep, your stress, and also movement. If you want to get started today, click the link in the description below to learn more about the Wellness on Purpose program. By the way, it's completely free and you can move at your own pace from the comfort of your own home. Now let's get back to the episode. Now, with salt, I think too, we see this rise in conversation because we also are kind of relating it to some lifestyle habits as well too, increasing sweating and things like that. Now, do you think that everyday lifestyle habits, whether it be, you have a sedentary job, you have an active job, or you're somebody who has an active lifestyle versus more of a sedentary lifestyle, like where does that come in when it comes to thyroid? Does it actually have an impact? Do we need to have certain lifestyle habits that are positively impacting our thyroid? What's your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, for better or for worse, exercise does affect our thyroid. Now, typically, most things are improved with some kind of physical activity. And I can't think of a single condition in which I could say, yes, you're better off being a couch potato when it comes to this condition. But if you're exercising more, especially in this time of year, you're probably sweating more, you're losing more minerals, you want to be getting all of them back in. That's important and something to keep in mind. But in general, exercise is beneficial for our stress response, which is good for our adrenals, which is good for our thyroid. So as well as, managing stress in particular, which is important for overall health. And again, this endocrine system relationship.
You mentioned exercise, you mentioned stress. What about sleep? Does that have any impact on the thyroid?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And this is huge. And I'm glad you brought it up because, again, and it often comes back to this stress, like sleep, stress, cortisol. So we know that if you've cut back on your quality or quantity of sleep, the next day you will have higher cortisol levels because of it. And that can impact your thyroid function as well as the rest of your health negatively. We know that when we have cut back on sleep, it stimulates our appetite, makes you want to eat more, whether there's because you have a shortage perhaps in energy that you should have been making while you're sleeping. So your body tries to do that with extra calories. So that can impact, especially for somebody who may already have a sluggish or slow metabolism. And then this sleep is making things worse. So there's definitely a bit of a vicious cycle that can happen with poor sleep and poor thyroid function.
Okay. I mean, sleep is really the foundation for doesn't matter what conversation we were having today, sleep is just bottom line so important. Quality of sleep is so important. I know we've really been fixated on like this time of 7 to 9 to 10 hours, but again, you could have 10 hours of sleep and have the worst sleep cycle pattern possible. So quality sleep, very, very important.
Mhm.
Now, you very quickly kind of touched on top nutrients. We talked about food per se for thyroid function. Iodine, selenium, top nutrients to help balance the thyroid. But what else would be really supportive for our listeners who are looking to support their thyroid?
Um, so we talked about iodine, we talked about selenium, zinc. So this is a mineral that works in the creation, formation, and conversion of thyroid hormones into their active forms. And that will work along with selenium in doing that job of making T3 and converting T4 to T3 into its active forms. So all of these minerals, the thyroid seems to need a lot of minerals to do this job. And I also mentioned earlier the amino acid tyrosine. Our thyroid hormones are use that and are based on that. There are a number of, there's a couple of herbs, in fact, that will help thyroid function. Ashwagandha, for example, is one of them. Now, people are hearing a lot about ashwagandha lately for sleep and its benefits on sleep, as well as for stress, athletic performance. But it is one that's been shown to support thyroid function as well.
Amazing. And we know that, as you said, like there's a lot of conversation around ashwagandha right now, so many benefits. And I think what's really great about ashwagandha personally is with all of those benefits, a lot of those things tend to be dysregulated at the same time. The sleep, the stress, the hormones, the energy, maybe the athletic performance is declining because you're so fatigued or, you're just not recovering in the same way. So when you can choose an herb like that, that does so many different things, I just find people are so much more likely to continue to take it because they see the results a little bit faster because it's impacting all of those things that are dysregulated. So big, big fan of ashwagandha.
Yes, and it also helps to support testosterone levels, which we talked about as being connected to this and having some of the similar um, overlapping symptoms. And as well, so many people now taking it at night for sleep. So yes, as you mentioned, it does, sort of address everything to help get things back on track.
Amazing. So, for our listeners, just to kind of summarize some of the things that we talked about in this episode, first and foremost, look at your lifestyle factors. Look at, are you moving your body daily? Are you sleeping properly? Can we improve those two? Are you managing your stress? Can we look at how to reduce your stress, or at least try to build resistance to stress? The basal body temperature would be a great place to start, and then going to run your test. Can you do a recap again on what somebody would be asking for at their doctor or their naturopath for the thyroid test?
Yeah, so if your body temperature running below 36.5 degrees Celsius on a daily basis, or 97.8 in Fahrenheit, that is a sign that your thyroid function is low. So you want to be getting that checked out. So you want to look for a thyroid panel that will cover TSH, T3, T4, possibly thyroid antibodies as well. To see if there's any autoimmune component happening with your symptoms. It is a good idea for most people, men and women, to get ideally a hormone panel, maybe testosterone checked, definitely iron levels checked. B12 can affect energy, and vitamin D levels are important for thyroid function. If they're low, you can't have healthy thyroid function. So those are kind of main things that you'd get checked out.
Awesome. Thank you for recapping that. And then looking at how to incorporate maybe some seaweed into your diet. That would be a great place to start. And then looking at those top nutrients in possibly supplementation as well. Any final, words of advice for our listeners who are struggling with low thyroid function?
That I would say don't necessarily accept it or take it for granted. If you're not feeling as well as you should be feeling, and you've been told, oh, well, we did a blood test, it's fine, then you should feel fine. And if you don't, then, look at what we're talking, maybe either get some more tests or take a different approach. Because you really should have, feel well and have that sense of complete well-being.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today to share your wealth of information, and to really touch on some of those big conversations around low thyroid function.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Take care.
Before we close off this episode, I wanted to share a personal recommendation with you based on some of the information that Kate shared in this podcast. And this is coming from a point of my own personal use for this product. And I just think it would be very supportive for you listeners to have a personal review, but also maybe you're thinking, how do I get these nutrients that Kate talked about in a very simple, easy to use formula? Now, of course, you can get some of those nutrients that she talked about, such as L-tyrosine, ashwagandha, iodine, selenium in single supplementation products, or you can try and source some of those things from foods and herbs naturally, like teas. But I just found for myself, I needed something that was easy to be taken day to day and had all of those key nutrients in one formulation. So the product that I reach for when I need some thyroid support is Women's Sense Thyroid Sense. And this is a really great, well-rounded formulation that has the tyrosine, the ashwagandha, the iodine, selenium. There's also some manganese, copper, and a few other ingredients in there that are really great for helping to support the thyroid function. So if you are someone who experiences symptoms such as weight gain, moodiness, poor concentration, anxiety, low libido, cold intolerances, dry, brittle nails, hair loss, night sweats, insomnia, constipation. There's so many symptoms. Or you know that you have a low thyroid function. This would be a really great formulation that you could potentially put into your day-to-day routine. Now, as always, we recommend checking with your healthcare practitioner before adding supplementation into your routine, but I wanted to share just a little bit of light on my personal use of a product that I think is really well-rounded and supportive for low thyroid function. And one other thing I wanted to mention about Women's Sense in particular and this company is that when they are looking at formulations to support any type of endocrine system, they are looking at the entire body. So as Dr. Kate said, typically when your thyroid's imbalanced, it affects the adrenals, or your adrenals are imbalanced, it will affect the thyroid, and then also have a ripple effect through to estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So all of our endocrine glands are working together to try to maintain this homeostasis through the body. And unfortunately, when one thing is not working optimally, the other ones tend to be either working overdrive to try to balance the body out or also underperforming. So if you want to learn more about how you can support your body with nutrients through Women's Sense, they have some incredible formulations depending on what you're dealing with, whether it's more of adrenal, whether it's more of hormones, whether it's thyroid. They have it all. So I'm going to leave a link to their website in the description below for you to learn more about their formulations. But as always, you can pop into Joanne's place, talk to any of our supplement staff, and they would be happy to show you these formulations and decide which one might be best for you. Anyways, I just wanted to share a personal little tidbit there in one of my favorite brands in the health and wellness industry, which is the Women's Sense formulations. Thank you for joining us for another insightful episode of the Wellness on Purpose podcast. We hope you found the information valuable and inspiring to support you along your wellness journey. Before we go, a quick reminder. The content shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, it's important to remember that everyone's health journey is unique. We strongly recommend consulting with your healthcare professional or a qualified health practitioner for personalized advice tailored to your specific needs and circumstances. Your well-being is a priority, and speaking to a healthcare professional ensures that you receive guidance that best aligns with your individualized health goals. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please reach out to us through our website. That's all for now. I hope you stay well, stay informed, and remember, your health is your greatest wealth. Until next time, take care.